Well, hi, my name is Andy Tidy and welcome back to another episode of Canal Hunter Series 6. In this series we are looking at the lost canals which existed on the western side of the Dudley Netherton range of hills. And so far we've worked our way back through Merry Hill and we've arrived at the end of the Two Locks line, which is near Blowers Green or Park Head. Now, there are no massive lost chunks of canal up here. Instead, there's lots of fragments, odds and sods if you like. So those are the sections that we're looking at as we travel along the contemporary Dudley No. 2 canal. The first one I want to show you is right behind me now. It's Brewin's tunnel. Bit of a puzzle really, because there's no tunnel here at all. And it stands right next to Lodge Farm Reservoir. Now, this section of canal has been through a number of iterations over the course of the years. When the Dudley No. 2 was first built, it skirted a hard outcrop of rock and it avoided the cutting behind me. Instead, it went out that way and it cut around the back of what is today the Lodge Farm Reservoir. But then in 1838, when the activity levels on the canal was high, and a 75-yard tunnel was built by the canal superintendent Thomas Brewin. So in effect, he just cut off a big corner. Well, the tunnel built by Thomas Brewin was then something of a bottleneck in itself. So after 20 years, technology of mining had moved on, and so they opened out the tunnel and they turned it into the steep cutting that we see today. These days, all you can really see of the old line of the canal departing out around the Lodge Farm Reservoir is a slight indent on the western side, and similarly a kind of an indent on the eastern end of the reservoir as well. And right next to me is the BCN cottage number 159. To help the reservoir fill up, they installed a scoop water wheel, and that was put in 1840, and it moved the water from the canal in times of plenty and was obviously looked after by the occupant of this cottage. To put this reservoir into some kind of context, it's fairly large. It's got an average depth of 26 feet and contains 500,000 cubic metres of water. That's a lot of lockfuls. These days it does still exist, but it's used as a water sports centre and has been owned by Dudley Council since 1966. It's even referred to as the Netherton Reservoir, or as the locals tend to call these things, the Razza. Well, as you carry on along the towpath from the Lodge Farm Reservoir, you'll come to the site of the old Salt Wells Basin. And why salt wells? Well, there was a well that produced brine. The Derby family even tried to exploit it, but the reserves weren't really dense enough. But it did form a local spa resort for a while in the 1800s. Carry on a bit further and you'll come to Primrose Basin, a mere shadow of what it used to be, a long U-shaped basin, and opposite that there was the proving house. Between Primrose Bridge and Bishton Bridge there was Noah Hingley's Netherton Iron Works. This was the site where the infamous Titanic anchor was cast, the chains were made, and then they were shipped just slightly up the canal to have them proved at the proving house at Primrose Wharf. And why is the bridge called Bishton Bridge? Well, a certain Mr. Bishton used to lay on a packet service from here through to Old Wharf in Birmingham every Sunday morning. And so the story goes. The local rabid Baptist minister took a dim view of these proceedings on the Sabbath, so he proceeded to stand opposite the packet boat and regale them with a hellfire and brimstone sermon. From my knowledge of preachers, they tend to go on a bit, so I suspect that this outdoor evangelist got to the point a bit quicker than normal. And then we come past Withymoor Island. That's a centre these days for mooring boats, but it used to be a great railway interchange basin with its wooden covered shelter straddling the arm. All the sidings and the shed were lifted up in the 1960s, and the site was repurposed to what you see today. And then we finally come to where I am now. This is the entrance into Netherton and Bumblehole, but what I'm actually standing on is the bridge into the Withymoor arm. This led into the Withymoor brickworks and the Withymoor colliery. These days it's all long gone, but the line of the canal or its embankment is faithfully traced out by Derby End Road. Now, Netherton and Bumblehole tends to be one of the crossroads of this part of the canal network, and I often come this way. We often moor here. We trade at the Canal Festival each year, and every time we come here I walk along a road called Derby End, and I always wonder, what was it that caused it to be called Derby End? And in doing the research for this video, I came across an answer. It turns out that the section at the end of the Withymoor branch was the place where all the nail making went on, and the nail making was undertaken by people who'd come in from Derbyshire, hence Derby End. But that of course isn't all. I mentioned about the fire and brimstone Baptist preacher. Well, of course, all the people who went to the Baptist chapel, they gathered at Baptist End. They're an imaginative bunch, aren't they? But of course, it's not so very different on boating. We like to call things holes. You got bridge holes, engine holes, bed holes. Everything's got a hole. But there you go. I think the matrix of canals that we find here in the Bumblehole Local Nature Reserve needs a little bit of explanation. The main straight drag that you can see behind me is a relatively modern addition to the landscape. This straight embankment was built in 1858, and it was built in conjunction with the building of the Netherton Tunnel just beyond. In fact, I think it's pretty true to say that it was built from the Netherton Tunnel, because all of that muck they dug out of the hill had to go somewhere, and so they used it to make this embankment and to cut off what was a bit of a tortuous and subsidence-prone section of canal that went that way. And that, of course, is the way we're going to go today. Now, this little arm, known these days as the Bumblehole branch, is in actual fact the old line of the Dudley No. 2 canal. It reached up here around the back of some collieries and clay pits, which are immediately to my right. Oddly enough, it's the one and only bit of navigable BCN that I've never actually brought my boat down. I guess the reasons for my reluctance to venture down here is it's all a bit tight for space, and it's people's residential moorings. I mean, you can get through here, you can turn. In fact, it's a really interesting little spot. But frankly, I struggle to justify the effort for coming down here. The bit we're looking at right in front now is the entrance to the rather extensive Buffrey's Basin. That went beyond St Peter's Road, and the idea is it would go all the way up to Baptist End. In reality, it just went a few hundred yards beyond, and they may do with a tramway for the rest. But let's follow this watered section and see where it goes. Well, the short answer to that is not very far. Maybe 100 yards beyond that junction, the canal simply runs out and is replaced by the bit of bank that you can see today, and possibly maybe a bit of a ditch. Now, while we stroll around the back end of Bumblehole, I thought I'd tell you about an unusual story which came to light during the course of my research. You see, it's all to do with the Baptists of Baptist End. It turns out that not only did they have a fiery preacher who preached fire and damnation on anyone who didn't obey the rules, the congregation also practiced their baptisms in a slightly unusual way. And you need to understand that the way the Baptists do this is they take an adult and they put them right underwater and pull them out again, kind of symbolic of dying to your sins and being reborn. But the Baptists of Baptist End, they had a special place to do their baptisms, and it was in a warm water hole where warm water flowed out from one of the nearby furnaces. I suspect if you tried to do it these days, the pollution would bring the Baptists at Baptist End to a very premature end. Anyway, the reason that there is no canal round here at the back of the lake is because of the Windmill End boiler works and colliery. Of course, the coal was removed and the land has sunk. Usual story. So the canal went down with it. And rather than try to keep the canal going, it was just an awful lot easier to simply build an embankment across the far side of the valley and run the canal across that. And that brings us around into the open area, which is the centre of the Bumblehole Local Nature Reserve and the central arena for the Black Country boating festivals. And finally, we get back to some more real canal. This time it's the Boshboil Arm. So the old Bumblehole branch and the Boshboil Arm are two parts of the original Dudley No. 2 canal, which were superseded by the new embanked section that was built when the Netherton tunnel was constructed. Straightforward? Yeah, I think so. Also, Boshboil Arm has an inlet that takes the surface water off the site of the old Gads Green Reservoir. Not that I can find that inlet today, but we know it's in there somewhere. And that brings us to a crossroads and what must be one of the most picturesque and well photographed sites of the BCN. This is the crossroads where the old Dudley No. 2 line crosses the shortened version that went into the tunnel. Running behind the camera is the way in from Stourport and the Maryhill Shopping Centre. Running ahead behind me is the route into the Netherton tunnel. To your left, that's the way into the Boshboil Arm, which would have been the old route around the lake. And off to your right, the Dudley No. 2 canal continues on all the way through to Sellyoak. And that is where we were going to go next. Standing out above the whole site, there is the remains of Cobb's Mill, one of the old local mining pumping engines which kept the mines dry and allowed them to extract the coal. Coal mines riddled this area, as you can imagine, and the whole scene is a plethora of canal sidings and basins. Many have been lost, but by some small miracle, some have survived. Anyway, our arrival at Bumblehole marks the end of this episode of Canal Hunter. And that also means we're getting perilously close to not only the end of Series 6, but the end of the quest for all the lost canals of Birmingham Canal Navigations, all 60 miles of them. All that we have left is the 3 miles of canal down to Horn Basin, which you can still travel, and beyond that, the base of what will become the Lappel Canal. I suspect we've probably got another 2 or 3 episodes left to go. But don't worry, there's lots more to Canal Hunter to follow that. So for now, it's a goodbye from Bumblehole and goodbye from this episode of Canal Hunter. I look forward to seeing you soon. Happy hunting and cheerio.